Hello and welcome to another Thursday night Q&A. My name's Sam Donaghy and I'm very pleased to say I'm joined tonight by my colleague Craig Cunningham from our technical services team. Firstly, good evening Craig. How are you and how's your day been so far?
Yeah, I'm good, Sam. Day's been busy as always on the technical helpline or technical services team. The periodic assessment validations and this afternoon on the helpline. So very busy.
Yeah, I know the phones have been busy, and it's been a hot day here, so which is good, but that I think that adds to the sort of the load and tiredness certainly. So yeah, anyway, good to see you, and it's been a while, so we'll catch up certainly. What we'll do is we'll start off with our question of the week that we posted out across social media channels at the start of the week. We'll go through that question with our answer, and then I would ask that the audience put your questions in the chat, and we'll go through some previous questions that we didn't get a chance to answer while we build up a little database of questions in the chat. So please do post your questions. As we always say, remember there's no such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers. So please do, and please remember to be respectful to each other in the chat. So because the whole idea of this evening is that collectively we're going to try and help each other with the aim of improving our collective knowledge and understanding of all things associated with BS 7671 and the world of electrical installations. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. Our team will answer questions, but what the information we provide will be based very much on the information given to us in the question. We do have to post a disclaimer in that we can't be responsible for any errors or omissions that we make, and really the key is down to the end. If we do talk about legal requirements, it can't be seen as giving legal advice. And lastly, individuals have to rely on their own skill and judgment when making use of any of the guidance that's offered. Let's have a look at the question of the week. So the question of the week, which we posted out at the start of the week, was can I connect current using equipment on the circuit that's supplying the AC side of the solar PV inverter? So if we could picture it that we've got our supply to our inverter on that same circuit, could I spur off or tap off, however you want to describe it, some current using equipment, for example socket outlets? As I say, we posted that out earlier in the week. I'll just show a quick poll I had a quick look at the poll on LinkedIn earlier today, and that was quite healthy in that it showed the leading answer with 82% of the vote was B, no. 16% said yes and 3% said maybe. So that was interesting to see. So what is our answer, Craig? Are we allowed to do that or not?
No. So well, the answer is no, Sam, to keep it simple. But so current using equipment shall not be connected or should not be connected directly to an inverter's AC circuit, and any current using equipment shall be connected to a final circuit fed from an appropriate protective device downstream of the PV system. Downstream meaning or when referencing the PV system, so downstream of that. This means that it would ensure compliance with the requirements for ADS. Also, if we refer to the regulation 712.551.7.2, it states on the AC side, the PV supply cable shall be connected to the supply side of the overcurrent protective device for automatic disconnection of circuits supplying current using equipment.
Yeah, spot on. So yeah, some good explanation. In a nutshell, no. We were talking about it earlier, weren't we? And we believe that in the past, in the early days perhaps of PV adoption, there was some guidance which I can certainly remember a diagram which showed current using equipment, in particular socket outlets, being connected on that circuit. But it's a real no. And as you say, there'd be no protective device between the inverter and that current using equipment. So definitely a no. Okay, please do post your questions in the chat. While you're doing that, we'll try and answer some questions that were held over from previous times that we didn't actually get round to answering. So we'll take a look at the first one of those. So the first one of those is, can I calculate R1 plus R2 values from a measured value of ZS and ZE? So this is quite a common question, and it's asking us, can we calculate our R1, R2 value that we're going to record on our certificate and reports if I measure ZS and ZE? But our answer there is, again, a very strong no. The regulations are quite clear on that. It says that the continuity of conductors and connections to exposed conductive parts, extraneous conductive parts, have to be verified by a measurement of resistance. So we do see it because we see forms, certificates and reports where those values are exact. We do see it occurrence, and I think it's a common misconception. So certainly not allowed. The regulations are quite clear on that. It says it is. The measurement, we need to provide that measurement to confirm the continuity of our protective conductors and the connections to exposed conductive parts, because that's generally the way that we confirm the safety associated with automatic disconnection supply, that we have got a good earth to those items which may become live under fault conditions, and that's where our electric shock might come from. So yeah, we do need to do it, and we need to do it by a measurement of resistance. I think people may be getting confused in that you are allowed to calculate ZS from two measured values of ZE and R1 plus R2, and therefore, because the maths works, people perhaps think that you can go the other way and arrive at your R1 plus R2 value by subtracting ZE from ZS. But it's not allowed. You need to do a measurement to confirm that you have actually got an earth. Would you add anything to that, Craig?
The only thing I would say is to that, Sam, is normally this is done when we're carrying out initial verification. So ZE, your R1, R2, there may not be additional parallel earth paths. So if we did it the other way, if we took our ZE away from our ZS, we could come up with it wouldn't be a correct figure. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. That's a good point, and I think it is. I think people are generally doing it because they think the maths is fine. You can do it either way. Okay. Another question again that we get quite common, perhaps not so common now as when SPDs were first introduced, but still common. So, is it acceptable to use the DNO cutout fuse to provide overcurrent protection for a Type 2 SPD? So, where we've got an instance where the SPD doesn't have its own integral overcurrent protection, can I use the DNO's fuse as a means of protection for that SPD? What's our thoughts there, Craig?
Again, simple answer of no. We've had 3 no's in a row, so
yeah, it does. Good, but... we're not this negative normally, are we? Come on, we need better questions, yes, obviously.
No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. That's what it's like sometimes on the helpline. But no, this one's a no. The reason being is Regulation 534.4.5.2 states that in case of overcurrent protection device operation arising from SPD failure, the continuity of the supply to the equipment is unaffected. Well, if we had our main fuse operating, or the surge protection device working, the overcurrent protective device operates, we then haven't got the supply to the equipment unaffected anymore. So it would be affected at this point. Whereas if we had a protective device downstream of the overcurrent protective device, if that operates, continuity of supply would still be operating at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think as well that some surge protection devices have a shelf life, so they operate so many times and then fail. So that would mean that the SPD was still there, but had actually operated correctly, but then perhaps taken out the overcurrent protective device at its point of failure. But you don't want to lose the supply. You've protected it, but you don't want to lose it, and that's the whole thing. I think also plus that if you are going to use the DNO's fuse, you would need to get the DNO's permission, and then all those rules about distances and operation would also come in, and you would need to think about if it does take the DNO service head fuse out, how long is it going to be before the DNO get round to replacing it? So yeah, it's I think it was, again, early days of SPD, it was common, and I think it was a common error that people made. Not so much these days, but we do still get asked it from time to time. Okay, yeah, please do, if we've put a reminder in, if you've got any questions that have been rattling round, we'll try and answer them. If we can't answer them, we'll take them away and come back to you, but please do. The chat's open, so please start putting your questions in. While you're doing that, we'll look at some previous questions as well. So another one that we've got is, again, quite a common question. When only changing a consumer unit, what do I record on the schedule of inspections page for cables concealed in a wall being adequately protected against damage? So this is where we've got somebody that's undertaken a consumer unit change, possibly a distress change, so it needed to be done quickly, and then they're asking what do they record about adequately protecting cables in walls. Well, again, a little bit of a misconception. So in that area you would record not applicable, because you actually haven't done any cabling. You've only replaced the consumer unit and perhaps disconnected and then re-terminated those final circuits and the supply into your new consumer unit. So make it very clear that you haven't installed cables, and this is where I think people sometimes don't use enough detail in that box that says extent of work covered by the certificate, because if you say it's a new installation, then that will infer that you've provided a brand new installation, complete rewire, new accessories, and a new consumer unit. So make it very clear what you've done, so that at a later date you can't be accused of having done anything else. So you can exclude things as well, so yeah, just be very clear. Make it clear in that box that says extent of installation covered by the certificate that it was a consumer unit change only, with all of the original final circuits disconnected and reconnected into the consumer unit. So make it very, very clear what you do. Just before we go on to that, with just one of the engineers tonight, Craig, has come a thing about the question before. Does the Crabtree SPD contravene this regulation? It's designed to clip straight onto the buzz bar without overcurrent protection. Well, I don't know about that particular device itself, but certainly what I would say is the SPD does need overcurrent protection. If it doesn't have it integral that it's built in, because we now know that some manufacturers provide a unit which includes integral overcurrent protection, then you would need to provide it separately. For example, through a breaker, but not using the DNO's supply. Would you agree with that, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say there are some SPDs out there, like you said, with integral protective devices within them. So follow the manufacturer's installation instructions and consult them if you're not sure.
Definitely. And just, we flashed it very quickly, but that regulation, I'll just repeat it again. I know sometimes we don't like to hammer numbers, but yeah, 534.4.5.2 says, in case of overcurrent protection operation arising from the SPD failure, the continuity of the supply to the equipment is unaffected. So you do need to be mindful of that and consider whichever overcurrent protective device you're using for the SPD, what would happen if that overcurrent protective device fails, and it shouldn't affect the supply to the equipment. Okay, let's have a look. Another question.
Sorry, Sam. Before you go on, just following on from your question, the consumer unit change, and it's a common thing that we have that comes up on the helpline as to, what should I put in this box? What should I put in that box? And a lot of the time we will say to the contractors, it's about what you say and install, and about what you don't install and what you say. So you've got to make that clear. But also, I want to do a little bit of advertising. I know we don't normally, but it's really, really good publication for schedules and for what we could be putting into all of the different boxes, whether it's an EICR, minor works, electrical installation, is our inspection, testing and certification book. And I spoke to a gentleman today, and he said he was going to go and purchase that, and he'd had good reviews on it. So I just thought I'd mention that. That's something that we refer to quite often as well.
Absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree. It's very good, doesn't it? It breaks down all the forms, certificates and reports into their sections, and then explains the test that you need to do in order to obtain the information and what information to record. It really is a good publication. So it's because I think that sometimes our cameras blur. It's the inspection and test. It's the NICEIC guide to inspection, testing and certification, which you can buy from the website. It's also available if you've got your Vital Source digital package for your 7671. It's also available on Vital Source. But yeah, a really good publication. What we'll probably try and do is post a bit out on social media about that, because it's really good. It answers a lot of questions about certification.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a common EICR question. So somebody's been to a domestic installation which includes solar PV, but there's no warning label at the consumer unit regarding the alternative supply. Also, there's nothing at the solar PV. The solar PV inverter is in the loft, but again at the isolator for the solar PV there's no warning label of an alternative supply. And the engineers just ask what classification code would be required on an EICR for the emission of that warning label. What's our thoughts there, Craig?
Yeah, it's covered in Electrical Safety First, the best practice guide for classification codes for EICRs, and in there it gives a classification code of C3, which is on page 24 of that publication. And the reason for the C3 is it's recognised that although the required warning label is missing, any required inspection and testing of the installation, together with safe isolation, should identify alternative sources of supply. So once we've done those checks, so that's what they're saying, it's not potentially dangerous at that point.
Yeah, it's recognised that it's a 7671 regulatory requirement to fit the label, hence the C3. But just because the label's not there, if we were doing adequate inspection and testing, we should be able to identify that there's an alternative source of supply, either through inspection and measurement. So it's not the sole means of identifying the source of supply, in which case, as you say, its omission on its own wouldn't just be dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay. Another fairly common one that we get on the helpline is I've got to remove a redundant circuit. So is the removal of a redundant circuit and the associated cabling in a domestic property certifiable or notifiable to the local authority under Part P of the building regs? So do I need to certify it? Do I need to notify it to local authority? What happens if I remove a circuit, Craig?
It doesn't fall under the requirements of BS 7671, but anyone carrying out any type of, and I suppose you would still class it as electrical work, needs to be competent to do so. There are no. This is a similar type of question that does come up every now and again on the helpline. So we have questions about safe isolation. So there may be something that's being knocked down, and the DNO wants some type of form. But there are no generic templates or certificates for such work, and we would always recommend whatever you do, whatever you remove, etc., that you speak to your client and agree on how you're going to document what you've done.
Yeah. So again, it's all about making it clear what you've done, so that at a later date you can't be accused of having done something else or not having done something that was asked for. So yeah, it's one of those ones we get it quite often. There isn't a standard form, and quite often people are a little bit concerned, especially if they've removed something and they're removing it to make something safe. They want to provide evidence, but yeah, it's 7671, like you say, covers the design and construction, but not the removal. So there's nothing in 7671. There's no standard forms. So yeah, I think the guidance, as you say, that we generally give on that is, talk to your customer and make sure that they're happy with the documentation that you're going to give them to identify what you've done.
Also, the competency side of it is obviously proving dead, making sure it's dead, testing that circuit to prove that it's safe to leave or remove. So
yeah. Okay, another one that we've seen coming quite often, and I saw something earlier around this being posted, is do I need to test surge protection devices installed within an electrical installation, and what tests are required, what test instruments? Well, our answer to that is no. A visual inspection is all that's needed. There's no requirements in 7671 to perform electrical tests on SPDs, and sometimes applying electrical tests to SPDs might degrade them depending upon the SPD that you're looking at. Periodic electrical testing of SPDs is not a requirement of the SPD product standard or any international standard on lightning protection, and it's not recommended either by BEMA, so the British Electrical Association of Manufacturers also have published that information. So yeah, we're aware of people starting to to provide test equipment to enable you to test SPDs. But there's no requirement for that to happen. And as you say, some of them, we talked about it earlier, have a distinct shelf life of X operations. You know, I remember there's one manufacturer, I think it's quoted as 15 operations and then would need to be replaced. So actually by testing it, you might shorten its life cycle as well. So yeah, no requirement to, no need to. So yeah, there's no need to. They do have indicators to say whether they're healthy or not. So that's why we've suggested as the first point is that a visual inspection is all that's needed. Add anything to that, Craig?
No, I think you've covered everything there, Sam. As far as I was aware, that there is no requirement for it. I did see the article that you were referring to earlier, actually, where someone had mentioned a number of various different things, and it was a bit of to and froing, but I didn't get involved.
No. and as you say, this is another one that is so this is a recently published Q&A on the Electrical Safety First's RAG frequently asked questions. So just for those of you that aren't aware, there's an organisation called the Wiring Regs Advisory Group, WRAG for short, and they meet typically monthly. They're made up by a number of certification bodies like ourselves, the NICEIC, also others such as the representatives from the IET, representatives from the ECA, from BEMA, manufacturers, awarding bodies as well. So a lot of key bodies from the electrical industry, and that the purpose of RAG is to try and come up with some industry agreed answers to common questions, predominantly around the interpretation of BS 7671. So the whole idea is that then if we've got an industry agreed response, then that should be good enough for our customers. That should be something that industry will accept as the right thing to do. Now, those there are two FAQ databases, one for new installations, one for periodic inspection and testing of existing installations. But you can go onto the Electrical Safety First website. If at the top banner, I think the easiest way to get to it is click on the link for professional resources, and then click on the link for wiring regulations, and you'll then get the two databases, one on installations, one on periodic inspection. And I can see, because this is a snapshot of the question on the Electrical Safety First website, and it's Q2.652 tells me that this is from the periodic inspection set of questions, and it says so. The whole idea then being is that you could show that to a consultant, to a customer, to a consumer, and this is accepted industry guidance. It's not just your personal opinion, it's not just the opinion of the NICEIC. We agree with it because we're one of the bodies behind RAG, but it's a very useful tool, something that you can rely on, and in particular the classification codes. If people do start to question and dispute your classification codes, if you can show them the evidence from RAG that you're complying with that industry agreed acceptance. Okay, let's have a look. We've got some questions now that have come through in the chat. Let's see what we've got from here. So one that's come in straight away, I guess it's this time of year. At what depth should I be burying cables in a domestic garden for garden lighting? I'll have a stab at it to start with. There's no depths mentioned in 7671. That's the first thing. It does give us some guidance on the the type of cable and the protection. So we either need to use a steel wire armoured cable if we're burying it, or we need to put it in conduit or ducting that provides similar strength. But there's no mention of depth. I think in the guidance, general guidance in a domestic garden is at least at a depth of 0.5 metre, 500 millimetres, for general gardening. But where more onerous conditions, it could be further. So if we are digging, and you know, certainly when you get into agricultural, not domestic, you'd go deeper. Always recommend that the buried cable is identified with warning tape or covers, and we also strongly recommend that the route of the buried cable is identified in a drawing that's attached to the electrical installation certificate, so the homeowner will have some evidence, because it may not be obvious to them which route you've taken. So yeah, no definitive depth mentioned in 7671, but general guidance in a garden is 0.5 metre. Would you agree with that, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. The regulation that you were referring to was 522.8.10 in the regs. If anyone wants to look at that, that's near the bottom of page 143. There is some guidance out there, various different guidance. So sort of from 400 to 600. And as you mentioned, for agricultural, I think the minimum guidance is at least 1 metre down because of diggers, etc. So yeah, there's also, or it used to be called the National Joint Utilities Group, that had depths for individual services, so water, gas, various, and they had colour coding on that. So that was quite a good thing, but you wouldn't necessarily use that for a domestic garden.
Yeah, no, you're right, isn't it? I think that's, is it in guidance note 1? I think that's in the IET's guidance note 1, and I think you're right, those letters triggered something, and it talks about different depths for pavement, for road. So yeah, and it does, like you say, gas, water, they're all mentioned, and the general depths that they're
utility groups.
Yeah, no, spot on. Okay. Carrying out electrical work on an installation forming part of a TNCS system, is it necessary to upgrade existing 6mm bonding to 10mm? What's our thoughts there, Craig?
Again, I think there was a question and answer on RAG at some point. Whether that's there anymore, I don't know, because that gets updated every so often. But the general view would be that it may be acceptable to use, dependent on continuity measurement or visual verification, and also signs, or that there are no signs of any thermal damage or discoloration of those bonding conductors.
Yeah. So if they're in and working and there's no evidence, like you say, of thermal damage, then that would indicate that those are currently adequate. We would, anything new, so if there was something which involved new bonding conductor, we would recommend that you meet current requirements of 10mm, but you wouldn't necessarily need to go round and upgrade all of the existing circuit. Okay. This one is, again, it's not a definitive, but we've got some guidance. So where a C2 classification code has been given to an observation, how long is deemed acceptable to carry out that required remedial work to make the installation satisfactory? A couple of things I'd say is that although there's no time in terms of days mentioned, 7671 does say, the guidance in Appendix 6 says that observations classed as C2 should be dealt with as a matter of urgency and dealt with by a skilled person competent in such electrical installation work. So there's no definitive guidance other than as a matter of urgency. I think what's generally accepted now is the work that was put in to create the legislation for the private rented sector in the UK gives the landlord a period of 28 days from receiving the report to make good. And so that although there's no date specified, I think 28 days is accepted as a good yardstick for that measurement. But you know, the inspector, if he feels that it's more onerous, is in their right to recommend a more immediate response. But at the end of the day, they are saying it's a C2, so it's not currently dangerous. Something needs to occur for it to become dangerous. But yeah, 28 days is good guidance because there's nothing definitive mentioned in 7671. Would you add anything to that, Craig?
No. Well, other than the 28 days is the maximum period that they need to get the work done. So it would still meet the requirements of or the suggestions within BS 7671, wouldn't it? You know, to be done as a matter of urgency. It's just allowing that period of days because they know sometimes they can't gain access for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean that's legislation. That part that was built into that.
Yeah. Another one an engineer has asked is, what's the NICEIC stance on cable tie-in protective conductors to gas pipes? This engineer has added that they've recently had to write in workmanship standards and procedures to ensure that correct install methods are used from 7671. They also reference a reg BS 6891 gas reg that states 25 mil and 150 mil as distance from pipe to cable and pipe to equipment. Yeah, I think we totally agree. So we shouldn't be cable tie-in cables, electrical cables to gas pipes, and we shouldn't be in generally using gas pipes as our means of support for the installation. You know, 7671 is very clear and says that cables need to be adequately supported for the environment that they're in, and as you rightly say, the gas guidance gives us distances which we use also when we're installing consumer units in domestic properties to ensure that they're distanced from the gas pipe. And I think that's in our pocket guide. Again, I'll have a quick note in that, but I think those distances there are referred to. So 25 mil for cable and 150 mil for electrical equipment. But yeah, shouldn't be being done. Yeah, we recognise that it is done, but honestly, quite often in that arena of where it's quick and dirty. So it might be quick to do that, but it's not the right way to do it, and shouldn't be done. Add anything to that, Craig?
No, other than those reference distances are also in the IET on-site guide. I know that's in the front of that as well. So I think you're right. I think they are in our pocket guide in one of them. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, BS 7671 is quite clear. All cables should be adequately supported throughout their length.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can't, you know, the first thing we'd always say is that gas pipe might be taken away. You know, that's not part of the electrical installation. If it's part of the gas supply pipe, then it doesn't belong to the owner either of the building. So what happens then when that gets taken away? So yeah, a real no-no. Let's have a look at what else we've got coming in. Again, yeah, this is quite common. So what do I do when I find a TNCS system with a ZE that is greater than the typical maximum? So we'll talk about that as well. So the engineers asked, what should I do when I find a TNCS system with a ZE greater than the typical maximum of 0.35 ohms? What's our thoughts there, Craig?
In the first instance, they should contact the DNO to see whether there is an issue with the network, whether that may be the best that they can get in that area. Because for example, it could be outlying on the edge of a village at the end of a run, for example. So it could be high because of those reasons. But in the first instance, always contact the DNO.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that so the 0.35 is really, it's not a typical, it's not a maximum that the DNOs have to achieve. So we get this quite often, both on 0.35 figure for TNCS and the 0.8 figure for TNS. That's not a threshold that the DNOs have to achieve. It's a typical value that is given out for design purposes. So when you're doing the design of your installation, you can base your ZE on a TNCS system as 0.35 ohms and your ZE on a TNS system of 0.8. But when they've done their work, if they were to come round and say, okay, your TNCS system is actually 0.4, they wouldn't necessarily have to redig the road and relay the cable. So long as it's stable, they'll be perfectly happy with it. If you tell them that it was 0.35 last year, but it's 0.5 now, and in 6 months' time it's 0.6, that's when they will start to question things and perhaps do some investigation. But while it remains stable at a low value, even if it is greater than the typicals shown, they may not do anything. Obviously, you need to consider that higher value still means you're meeting your ZS's for your circuits within the installation. But if you are, that's fine. Just record it, and as Craig says, record the fact that you've contacted the DNO about it, and if they give you any references or any further guidance, record the guidance that they give. But don't be surprised if they don't rush straight out just because it's a little bit higher than one of those typical values which are quoted. Let's have a look. We can fit in a few more. I know we are running out of time again, as we do. What have we got? So the engineer that talked about the gas pipe has said that it's good guidance that we've given. A property fed from overhead cables, however it's buried under the ground for 10 meters into the property, would it still require a type 1 SPD? So it looks like it was originally an overhead supply, but then 10 meters from the property it's buried under the ground. Would it still require a type 1 SPD? So I think we're in the realms of lightning protection as well as that. So I think in general guidance would be yes, still consider it, because if we've got a long run of overhead cable prior to that, then that's still susceptible to those lightning strokes, and then although it's 10 meters underground, that may not be a large enough distance to get the required not attenuation, but whatever the opposite, I can't remember the word is, but you would still get that effect. So it's a good question, and I think I would maybe get some guidance from your chosen SPD manufacturer. But my initial thought, which I will check up on, is that I would suggest yes, it's type 1 if in general it's an overhead supply. What thoughts there, Craig? I know lightning protection isn't completely our special subject, but
yeah, again, I think, and I know I've had a similar situation myself previously, because I'm on a TT system and I've got overhead lines very, very nearby. I didn't have surge protection. I've now got a type 1, type 2, type 3. That was my choice. However, I believe if there's a risk of lightning strikes because of the overhead, it would be wise to install it. But it's definitely worth speaking to the manufacturers to see whether they would suggest in that instance it's worth installing.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll take one last one. On a domestic condition report, what classification code should be given to meter towels which are over 3 meters in length? Again, quite a common question, because I think everybody's aware of the 3 meter rule associated with meter towels, and within that distance generally the DNO will allow us to use their service head fuse, but you have to remember that the EICR is about the continued safety of the installation. So I would suggest that, providing the tails, even though they're over 3 meters, if they're still in good condition, if the cutout fuse provides adequate overload protection, and the maximum demand of the installation is met with the current carrying capacity, you can meet the ZS of the cutout fuse. The tails have got adequate protection for the environment they're installed in. The cables are supported to not put stress on the cables or the conductors, and if they're required, they're adequately supported against premature collapse. Then I think the fact that it's a 3 meter length isn't dangerous, so would suggest there's no classification code if we can ensure that all of those other things are okay. So just exceeding the 3 meters it doesn't make it unsafe. I think it'd be more likely that for example, if the tails were damaged or they weren't sized correctly for the cutout service fuse, and they were so long that you weren't meeting the ZS, then all of those are then issues which are potentially dangerous. But just for the fact that it's over 3 meters doesn't actually introduce danger into the installation. Would you add anything to that, Craig?
Again, I think you've covered it all off, Sam. It's a common question that we get from an EICR point of view, and it's one of those questions, we would say we wouldn't install it that way. However, we're not looking at it from an installation point of view. We're looking at it, as you rightly said, to be safe for continued use. And if there is no safety issues that you could record with it, then no code would be required.
Yeah. And just one last one, which I'm just reading here. I don't think we'll have a definitive answer, but we'll certainly take it away. During an EICR, what's the guidance when we come across fire stopping products that have been used to bunch cables together? Aware these are non-insulating fire stopping products on the market, but without data available, how would we report on this? We're concerned about the impact on cable capacity and compliance. So yeah, I think it's something that you perhaps do a bit of research on, both through your chosen cable manufacturer, and perhaps think about doing some measurement of cable to see how it's coping with that current carrying capacity under those conditions. So is it getting warmer? Typically we're looking at cables that will run when loaded at 70 degrees C. So are we seeing it higher than that because of the cables bunching and the material that's being used? So perhaps something that not unless there are signs of thermal damage immediately, then perhaps not something that would warrant a classification code immediately, but one of those things that perhaps would warrant you to say, okay, we might reduce the period to the next inspection because I want to see what effect that material is having on the cable, its current carrying capacity and its thermal insulation. So have a look. Speak to the cable manufacturers if you can get more information about the products being used and their insulation properties. Then again, that'll be useful information that that your cable manufacturers would help. But some investigation required. I'm not suggesting an FI unless there is evidence of thermal damage, but one way to look at it would be perhaps to think about reducing the period to the next inspection because you want to see what effect that is having on the cable. Bit of a hard one to give a definitive answer. Anything you'd add, Craig?
Was the because I can't see the question. So was the insulation a product? Could they speak to the insulation manufacturer as well for possibly guidance on that to see whether that's appropriate for cables, for example? It may just be a fire stopping thing for gaps rather than for products to pass through it. I don't know. Maybe that's worth asking a question of as well. You're
right, because the engineer has said that they're aware there are non-insulating fire stopping products, which would indicate that the engineer feels the ones currently being used are insulating. So get as much information as you can, but certainly consider perhaps reducing the period to the next inspection to enable you to do a comparison of how if things have degraded, by how much they've degraded in that short time. Okay, we're very bad timekeeping, but there were some good questions there that were relevant, so we wanted to try and keep them. I'll just quickly rattle through a few points. We've got some information on the screen there, so if you're not currently registered with the NICEIC, then please do visit the website. We run a number of competent person certification schemes, including electrotechnical and MCS. We also, as an organisation, provide training, so we've got electrical, renewable technology, emergency lighting, fire alarms. So again, really strong in the training field. So if you've got some training requirements coming, please do contact us. For those of you that are NICEIC registered, The Wire is our webinar, which is CPD accredited. We've got one coming up on the 10th of July on Mythbusters. We're then going to break for the summer, so that's our last one before we break for the summer. Regarding external events, if you do want to see us, we've just spent 3 days. We were at the installer show at the NEC, so it was great if any of you were there and came along. The next events we're at in just need to check so in September we're at ELEX in Coventry. In October we have a CPD event in Bedford, which I'll give you a little bit more information on in a minute. And then in November we're at the final ELEX of 2025 in Sandown. So do please put those dates in your diary. Those are those up and coming events. The CPD event, which we talked about there, is for NICEIC certified businesses, and I think if you attend and go to the presentations and events that are on at the time, you can pick up something like 5 hours of CPD in the day. We've got some manufacturers and exhibitors there as well, so that looks to be a really good day. And lastly, just wanted to say thank you very much for taking part this evening. Apologies if we didn't get round to answer your question, but we will bring those and host those next time, or perhaps use them as our social media questions of the week. So please do. The next live Q&A is on Thursday the 7th of August at 8 o'clock. We try and put something on every Thursday at 8 o'clock for you, so again, put that in your diary as something, a point of view. And yeah, if you are a certified business, you can certainly record this as CPD. Hopefully you found it useful, and hopefully the information and advice we gave you was of use and answered your questions. Anything you'd like to add as a close, Craig?
Yeah, just like to say thanks for people logging in, watching, learning, and also I'm logging it for CPD.
Yeah.
So thanks very much.
Absolutely. It's every day's a school day, and the amount of times I'm looking for one answer and I find something else that I did not know was there. It never ceases to amaze me. So yeah, really good. So yeah, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you, Craig, and I'll catch up with you again soon. I'm sweltering. It's definitely got warmer in my little room here since we started. So yeah, I feel like I'm perspiring. So thank you very much. Once again, apologies if we didn't get round to answering your question tonight, but we will pick that up either at the start of the next one, or we'll use them as social media questions of the week and answer them that way. But thank you very much for taking part and replying to each other in the chat. Much appreciated, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Cheers.
Bye bye.